since we have now been justified by his blood, how much more shall we be saved from God's wrath through him? For if while we were God's enemies, we were reconciled to him through the death of his Son, how much more, having been reconciled, shall we be saved through his life? Not only is this so, but we also boast in God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have now received reconciliation. This is the word of the Lord.
Over the half-term holiday, I found myself in the odd situation of my 4-year-old watching his sister watching Murder, She Wrote, the very old school problem. And I thought this was relatively harmless. Angela Lansbury, she's lovely. There's no blood and gore. Until the scene where the cook was laid out on the floor with a knife in her back. And Zach said to me, "Dad, what's happened to her?" And I boldly said, oh, she's died. And he said, "Is it her cooking?" I said, no. And then I was trying to think, how do I explain to a 4-year-old? And then he got worried. He thought, well, what if I eat something? Did someone poison her? What if they try and poison me? So in the end of this conversation, in the only dad way to comfort him, I said, it's okay. She was just pretending. She had ketchup on her back and a pretend knife. Oh, okay. I mean, it was very sweet, very adorable, and as of yet, we haven't had any horrible dreams. But I know next time not to let him watch Murder, She Wrote. But at the same time as giving him very sweet comfort of, it's okay, it's not real, I was scrolling through the news as flooding in Spain had killed people, as wars were raging in Ukraine and Israel, Lebanon and the Middle East, as there was division in the US in light of all the presidential elections, as a government would keep seeming to tell us that our country's in a mess. And the trouble was, what I said to Zach, I couldn't say to myself. This isn't real, it's just pretend, they're just acting. Because it wasn't acting. Apparently, according to the World Happiness Report, yes, there really is such a thing. They do this every year. We are number 20 in the UK, but we've slipped from number 17. Yes, I'm sure there's far worse places to be, but even the reasons as they tell them of why we've slipped down that happiness report, increasing anxiety, post-COVID fatigue, young people not happy, show us that even the UK is a place that is struggling. By the way, if we all want to move to Mid-Sussex, thank you, Ellie, Mid-Sussex or Colchester, they're the ultimate places to go and live for because they're the most happy places, apparently. Thank you so much. You're a superstar. But on a day like today, we don't need to scroll through the news, do we? To know that we live in a world that is broken and hurting. To look back and see in history that it's always been the case. No amount of education or money seems to solve the problems. Wars and conflict and brokenness and hurt go on and on and on. So what do we do in the middle of a broken and hurting world? Or we could put our head in our hands and despair. But that just leads, as the World Happiness Report has shown, to increasing anxiety. Maybe trying to do, as I've done a couple of times, see whether we could emigrate to go to a different place. Maybe we could ignore it. Maybe we could pretend it doesn't exist. We could draw up the castle of home. We could build a life in our house that doesn't have to deal with the world and just live a happy life in our own carefree world. Or thirdly, probably we could find something or someone to get us through. Whether that's losing ourselves in work, absorbing ourselves in our family, looking for positive TV, things that will make us laugh, or just kind of losing ourselves in the world of funny social media memes and videos, or whether turning to places like drink and drugs and other things that might make us addicted. We're going to go somewhere, but where will we go? Well, let me tell you about a man called Paul. A man who had his life flipped upside down. He was a man who hated Christians with such a passion, he literally tried to hunt them down and kill them. He was probably the number one sort of atheistic man of his day, of trying to get rid of this Christian religion. He thought they were idiots until he met Jesus. And he turned his world upside down. And he then set about trying to tell people and write letters like the one we've got in front of us to help us see how Jesus can be an answer in a hurting and broken world. He goes from the comfort of his life to experience persecution, shipwrecks, famines, and wars. And he can still write words like this, that he longs for us to find security and joy in Jesus in a broken world. See, that's what God longs for each of us today, is that we'd find security and joy in Jesus. In fact, the word comes up 3 times in this passage from verse 1 to 11. It's translated either as rejoice in verse 2 and 3, rejoice, or in verse 11 it says boast, but they're the same word. Now, I don't know how you were brought up, but I was brought up to know that boasting is bad. As the eldest of 3, it normally happened that I was the fastest, the cleverest, or did this, whatever, before them. That is until they caught me up in size and age. Well, not catch up in age, but they managed to catch up in ability to do. And boasting was bad, wasn't it? Surely Paul doesn't want us to boast, does he? But this isn't boasting in ourselves. No, look, verse 11, boasting God. This is boasting in someone else. This is someone with a smile on their face, proud about this Jesus. Friends will say to me, Christianity, isn't that just a social crutch to get you through? Well, Paul doesn't think it is, because he's displaying it. He's saying how brilliant it is, this Jesus, who we can find security and joy in. And he wants to show us why. He gives us 3 things to show us why we can find security and joy in Jesus. Here comes the first. He's ended your war. He's ended your war. Now, believe it or not, Paul says each of us are at war with God in our lives. It's as though we either shake our fist at him and say, I don't really like you, don't want you here. And maybe a Stephen Fry who rages at God. Or whether we do it in a more subtle British way of kind of, I just don't like you, thank you very much. All of us at war, pushing God out the picture. Paul says deserving of his punishment that fits the crime, his judgment. But yet, even in this seemingly war that's gone on since the world began, look, verse 1, he says these words, we have peace with God. Literally, war has ended. I don't know, teenagers, if you've ever seen the footage of kind of the end of the Second World War, as it was told, people dancing in their streets, literally bouncing, hugging anyone that would move. You imagine? No longer fear of bombs coming overhead. No longer fear of your loved ones being lost on the front line. No longer having to sort of pick your way through life, but returning to freedom and joy. Well, that's the picture of what Jesus has done, that he's ended a war. He's brought peace. He's made you a friend. And how's he done that? Look at verse 1 again. We've been justified through faith. We've been made righteous. The guilty have been forgiven. They've been made innocent, as it were, through Jesus. Jesus literally goes in the dock and is punished for us so that you and I can go free, be his friends. Now, on the odd occasion, I find myself looking at YouTube. The algorithm presents me with this somewhat hilarious videos that I keep getting of a man called Judge Frank Capiro. He's in Rhode Island in the US of A. I don't know why he keeps appearing. But Judge Frank Capiro, he's like the granddad of judges. He's very warm and cuddly. And his YouTube channel is called Caught in Providence. He says this: he's a man that wants to meet people with kindness and compassion. And if you watch these stories, you'll kind of see a former military man who stole a loaf of bread because he's homeless. And he says, look, I know what you've done is not right, but we need to give you another chance. And whether through himself, through the people of that channel, he often pays the fine and the penalty for these people to allow them to go free. Judge Frank seems like a man you'd love to meet, wasn't he? Kind and compassionate. But he's just doing that for a few people. Here's Jesus. Look, he's doing that for all people that will trust in him. All people, if they'll trust him. In fact, look, it's not as even though people are trying hard. Because look at verse 6. You were at just the right time when we were still powerless. We couldn't bring anything to him. We couldn't do anything for him. We didn't really want to do something for him, but Jesus sought to end the war whilst we were still raging in it. Verse 8, that's why he says, whilst we were still sinners, or literally still enemies with God. We wanted nothing to do with him, but Jesus comes to end the war, to bring peace, to make a relationship of hostility now one of calm. And secondly, in ending that war, he longs to fill us with his love. To fill us with his love. Look at verse 8 again. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this: whilst we were still sinners, Christ died for us. See what Paul's saying? Back all those 2,000 years ago, Jesus died on a cross. You can see it as an act of his love for us. Now, I don't know if we were to display up here your acts of love, what you may do for a family friend or a member of your family, a spouse, what would you do for them? I was at Holy Trinity School on Friday and I asked the children. They had all sorts of great things, very exorbitant things. Take their friend to a theme park, give them a hug, buy them chocolates, something they like, take them out. Would you lay your life down for them? Maybe. But what would you do for your enemy? I still remember the schoolboy enemy that bullied me for 5 years. I don't want to talk to him, let alone do something nice for him. You may have heard of the World War I Christmas truce that happened in 1914, where both sides stopped firing and came together in no man's land for a game of football to sing some carols and exchange gifts. Wow. But the next day they were back at firing at each other. But Jesus goes one step further for his enemies. For those who are sinners, he dies for you to show you that he loves you. What an amazing truth. But he goes even one step further. For those that will trust him, verse 5, we didn't read, but let me read it to us. Hope does not put us to shame because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who's been given to us. See, if we'll trust him, he comes to be a presence in our hearts by his Spirit, and daily he pours his love into our hearts, like a daily reminder of what he has done for us on the cross. It may be sometimes we feel it and sometimes we don't. But he doesn't just want us to look back to the past, but to know every day that he loves us. And maybe as you're walking along the street and you see a beautiful sunrise, wow, God, you're amazing. Maybe as you listen to the Bible and it just strikes a chord in your heart. And maybe as you sing a song, maybe as you meet with another Christian, your heart is just warmed. That's what God longs for. To fill your hearts with love, a loving relationship that you don't have to try and keep proving yourself in, try and earn your way. There's nothing else like it. It's totally secure. It's like a marriage that's loving and cannot end in divorce. He longs to fill you with his love. But that's not all, because in the future, thirdly, here's why we can find our security and joy in Jesus. He will rescue you. He'll rescue you. Now, if you have heard about or know anything about the Dunkirk evacuation, Operation Dynamo in World War II, you'll know that it led to and was the fundamental act of winning the war. But it took a whole month between that operation ending and the Germans finally surrendering to bring about the end of that war. And Paul's saying here, similarly, look verse 9. He promises there'll be a future that he'll rescue from. Look, verse 9. Since we've now been justified by his blood, made right, become his friends, how much more shall we be saved from God's wrath through him? We can be rescued from God's final judgment. Now, on a day like today, thinking about a God who one day all of us will have to stand before, we may think, really? But it's good news, isn't it? The Hitlers will stand before God and have to give account. The crimes they got away with, they'll one day be punished for. The atrocities that are carried out in secret across the world will one day have to give an account. That's good, isn't it? Justice be done. Until we find ourselves having to stand there ourselves. A bit like the man who was on a trip in Asia and he got his passport and visa, but then when he was stopped by the police to ask him what right he had to be there, he lost both. And he suddenly had that moment of fear and trepidation as he really realized he didn't have a leg to stand on. That's what Paul's telling us about, to warn us about. That's why Jesus comes, so that the day where we have to stand before him, we may have some certainty. Look, since we've been made right, how much more will we be saved? Jesus has forgiven us so that we need not fear the future. That's why verse 11, that we can boast in this Jesus, because he's one who beats death and promises a world where there'll be no more wars, where wars will cease, evil will be done away with, and his perfect new creation will come into existence. A place that will rank number 1 on the World Happiness Report, with no more evil or bad or wrong. That's why Paul wants to boast. Because the war's ended, we've been filled with his love and will be rescued. It's a past, present, and future. It's secure and can bring joy. Even in a broken world, even when the doctor pulls you aside and says it doesn't look good. Even when your friends fail you, even when the world outside, even when the government, the economy, the places we live seem to be falling apart. So will we find security and boast in Jesus? Or will we get stuck in despair? Or we keep ignoring it? Friends, one day soon you're going to cruelly find out when you have to go to the funeral of someone you love. Or will we find something to get you through? And maybe like the countless stories of celebrities who've tried and looked for it everywhere and found nothing, we might be brought back to a place of finding it's only found in Jesus. Friends, might we boast? Will we find our security in Jesus? Maybe you're here and you're not a Christian today. Thank you so much for coming. It's really good to see you. Does this kind of give you something to question? Christianity isn't just a crutch to hold on to, not just a thing to do at various festivals, but claims to be one that can bring you security and joy throughout life. Just starting this week, we've got Hope Explore course. These little yellow cards are just in the Welcome Centre. We'd love to invite you along to do exactly as it says, explore what the greatest hope there is. Come along, 8 o'clock Tuesday evening. We'd love to have you. Maybe you want to speak with a friend. Or maybe even right now you say, I want it. And you can say to Jesus, I'm sorry for this war we've had. Thank you that you've ended it. Thank you that you love me. Help me to find my security and joy in you. And I guess for the majority of us here today, as those who are Christians, we know these things probably. But is boasting a word that's in your Christian life? Now, I know we're coming up to that time of Christmas, aren't we, where we'll get Christmas letters, and it will probably say something along the lines, if the ones I get. Little Johnny, he's age 3, he's just finished his grade 8 on the violin, and he's also just joined Mensa. Great, well done, little Johnny. It's not boasting in ourselves, but boasting in Jesus. Is that your experience? Or does life seem to take hold so hard that boasting and Jesus don't go together? Taking time to rejoice in him seems a distant prospect. What would it look like to be thankful for him, for you this week, to rejoice in him? As we're doing today, to sing songs together, to maybe encourage someone else that you know. God has given us ways and means of helping one another to rejoice in him. But equally, what would it mean for us to boast as we went beyond here? As we're coming up to Christmas time, the one time where it's still okay to talk about Jesus, what might it mean for you with your family and your friends to boast about Jesus? Not just kind of your latest triumph that you've managed to do, or the latest holiday you've been on, but boast in Jesus, to show him off, to rejoice in him. There's been a little group who read a book about sharing Jesus with others over the summer, and they've been meeting up to encourage one another. And it's been amazing to see how Bill, Jackie, Sue have been terrified, but dropping little seeds in conversations. They've had all sorts of chats about Jesus and their friends wanting to know more. How might we be those who boast in Jesus? Because we have a message to the world that they need to hear. The war, the brokenness that surrounds us can be ended. We can know love unconditional, and we can know a future certainty of rescue. That's why we as a church will keep boasting about Jesus, not hiding him. The church in the West may be in decline, the Church of England may be in a mess, but we long to be a growing family where God transforms lives through Jesus. As they hear of him, verse 8, of his love demonstrated as he died for sinners. As we think about it, we're going to watch a little video, a poem that speaks of war's ending. So let's have a moment to reflect.
If I should die, think only this. A bullet flew by that did not miss. What story of the war is told? Romance bright or horror cold? Triumph's tale or tragic loss? The iron or the wooden cross? Lost lament or victor's boast? Full brass band or lone last post? Heroes, villains, cowards, kings, it's war. It's all these things. It's us, unleashed for good and ill, the gallant heart, the savage will, a Kaiser's pride, a nation's fear, a global greed. It's all in here. What causes war? The old book asks. Beyond the history, beneath the masks, begins a want, becomes a will, demands its way, prepares to kill. The wars we mark as long ago are close to home. They're all we know. What ceases war? The pressing question. What can halt inborn aggression?
To end all wars and retribution, war itself is no solution. Can terror end all terror now? Brute force subdue itself and bow? Can darkness drive out darkened dread? Or death extinguish death instead?
We need to interrupt the spiral, find the antiretroviral. The story's told of Anti-Zeus, a god of peace, made human truce. Into our world, into our midst, a walking, talking armistice. A king now meek, his power made weak, to stand and turn the other cheek. To take the blow, absorb disgrace, then rise to give again his face in grace undimmed and arms unfurled, to bless and pacify the world. And you, to sweet surrender brought, forgiveness for your battles fought, peace to pass to every soul, then warfare ceased from pole to pole.
Well, at the end of that service, we'll be singing those words that Jesus one day will be the King who ends all wars.